Hello and welcome to the Curious Minds podcast. I am Evan Van Sickle over here at the Christian Student Center, right next to the University of New Mexico on Girard Avenue. You can smell the fresh cooking of Taco Bell outside our doors. You know, it is the middle of August and the new school year is about to start, so a lot of excitement in the area, a lot of trepidation probably on some students. We're seeing them in orientations, we're seeing a lot of locals, and we're seeing also loads of students coming from other countries. So that's been fascinating. Got groups from India, Nepal, China, Japan, even some of the smaller countries like Korea and Taiwan, and European countries, France, Germany, Spain, and African countries, Nigeria, Botswana. I heard one was from Egypt, and a few from the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, Jordan. Everybody's got their own background, their own experiences to contribute. There is a beautiful diversity of people that God has blessed us with on this planet, and there's a diversity of views along with it. I can sit at a table with somebody who lives on the other side of the world and feel like there's a better connection on spiritual and ethical principles than with my neighbor across the street. But I enjoy that. I enjoy the disagreement. And coming from a Christian worldview, I believe that a lot of strength can be bolstered into the Christian worldview by wisely interacting with people with dissenting views or views that maybe challenge your religious assumptions. After all, that's what Christian evangelists like myself expect and hope for with people coming from other backgrounds. So would we check ourselves in that matter before expecting someone else to? I hope we could. Also, as the school year is going to get started, I encourage you to come find me out there. We'll have the banner that says, "Ask Big Questions." So we want to hear what some of the ideas are regarding the nature of God, the nature of man, the nature of salvation. And we'll talk about these things. Low pressure. You're not going to be recorded. You're not going to be put on TV. But I look forward to meeting some of you out there at the University of New Mexico so we can think well about the things that matter most. So I'd like to address something that's coming from the Bahai faith and the Muslim faith. And there is a commonality in these two faiths. Well, after all, the Bahai faith believes in the commonality of all religion, to a point, I guess. As far as the major religions, the Bahai faith says they are all unified, and they are all a light that God gave to the world, to that specific location, for that specific time, and God's truth has come through 9 major prophets of God. See if I can remember them. Abraham, Krishna, Moses, Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah. Now, the Bab was basically the John the Baptist of the Bahai faith, the forerunner to Baha'u'llah, but was also seen as a prophet from God. So the Bahai faith teaches that there's a unification among all these major prophets of God, so-called prophets of God. So they believe in something called progressive revelation. Progressive revelation means that God is revealing more of himself as time goes on. There may be things that a certain culture at a certain time is not ready to understand about God, but a later culture at maybe a different location would be ready to receive such things about God. And ultimately, the one who's revealed the most about God and who is not going to have any successors for at least 1,000 years is named Baha'u'llah. He grew up in the mid-1800s in the Middle East and started this Bahai faith amidst a lot of persecution. Today it has about 6 million followers. Now, Islam takes some of the same claims as far as being a religion that is the successor of Jesus himself, that began about 600 AD with one of the same premises, and that premise being Jesus was a prophet of God, but he foretold of another prophet of God coming. And where do they get this idea? Well, they get it from the Bible. John 14 and John 16. Knowledge of what Jesus said and knowledge of what Jesus claimed about himself is going to be very important to interacting with faiths like the Bahai faith and Islamic faith, because the Bahai faith and Islam both believe that the words of Jesus are completely true because he was a prophet of God. So if we find the reliable words of Jesus in the Bible, which they both believe, all we need to do is point them to the full reality of what Jesus said about himself and about the forthcoming truth that he spoke about in John 14 and John 16. Well, let me read it and see if you can discern what it's about and maybe how a Muslim or how someone of the Bahai persuasion might interpret this. John 14:16, I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper, that he may be with you forever. That is, the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it does not see him or know him, but you know him, because he abides with you and he will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. After a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Because I live, you will live also. What is that talking about? If you're of the Muslim persuasion, you say that is a promise for the coming of Muhammad, another helper, a spirit of truth. He will abide with you. He will uncover this additional knowledge about the truth of who God is. If you're of the Bahai persuasion, you're saying this is a promise of Baha'u'llah, a spirit of truth, somebody coming to proclaim God's truth to people and to lead them toward the nature of God. And of course, if you're a Christian, you believe that this is the Holy Spirit who came 10 days after the Ascension at Pentecost. Now, why do we think that? Let's go ahead to John 16, and Jesus is talking about something similar because his disciples are grieving that he's going to go away. And how does he comfort them? He gives them the promise of the Holy Spirit. Don't worry about me going away. There's one of me on earth, but if the Holy Spirit comes, it can be as though Jesus is abiding in all believers everywhere. That's why he says this, starting in verse 7 of John 16. But I tell you the truth, it is to your advantage that I go away. For if I do not go away, the Helper will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. And he, when he comes, he will convict the world concerning sin and righteousness and judgment. And on down to verse 12, I have many more things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. But when he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he will guide you into all truth. For he will not speak on his own initiative, but whatever he hears he will speak, and he will disclose to you what is to come. He will glorify me, for he will take from what is mine and disclose it to you. And again in verse 16, a little while, and you will no longer see me, and again a little while, and you will see me. It should be pretty easy to identify that these verses are not talking about the coming of a future prophet. Muhammad did not claim to be another coming of Jesus. He did not claim to be God manifest in the flesh in any way. Now the Baha'is may want to ascribe that to Muhammad and give him a role that he didn't claim for himself by saying he's this manifestation of God to earth. But Muslims don't even believe that, and Muhammad never claimed that about himself. Now, Baha'u'llah maybe made some more drastic claims about the nature of who he is, as far as a second coming of Jesus, but there's issues there too. But if you look closely at some of the clues in these verses, you can see that Jesus is not giving room for a future prophet. The first reason is because he's talking to his disciples here. You will see me a little longer, and you won't see me, and then you'll see me again. If these disciples have to wait 600 years, well, Jesus can't be telling the truth there. There's a little bit of parallelism when he says, a little while, and you won't see me, and a little while you'll see me again. A short time. Well, the short time in this case was just a few days. And when they did see him again, the short time was after the resurrection, and then there was another short time where they were without the presence of the Holy Spirit for 10 days, and he was seen again. The disciples were a part of this entire process, because that's directly who he's talking to in both of these chapters. Another important place to go is Matthew 24, where Jesus is speaking about perilous times, the end times, the second coming. So he's going through a sequence of terrible events in this, possibly paralleling the tribulation of Revelation. But the significant thing to notice is in verse 23, then if anyone says to you, behold, here's the Christ, or there he is, do not believe him. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders so as to mislead even the elect, if possible. Jesus here is saying, there's gonna be all kinds of people claiming to be the Christ. I've told you in advance, don't believe them. And why should they not believe him? Why should they not believe these false Christs? Because the Bible also describes the nature of the second coming. It's not going to be as the coming of Muhammad or as the coming of Baha'u'llah. Now, the last things that Jesus spoke to his disciples are actually in the book of Acts. And he tells them, "It's not for you to know the times or epochs which the Father has fixed by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be my witnesses, both in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and even the remotest parts of the earth. The Holy Spirit will come upon you," which happened 10 days later. This is the one who will not leave them as orphans that he was just speaking about. After this, Jesus ascends to heaven, and the disciples are left looking up into the sky, as would I. 2 men in white clothing stood beside them, which parallels the resurrection, possibly parallels his birth as well. And they say, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into the sky? This Jesus who has been taken up from you into heaven will come in just the same way as you have watched him go into heaven." So the nature of the ascension is going to parallel the nature of the second coming. The second coming is not going to look like a natural birth like both Muhammad and Baha'u'llah had. Let's look at Mark chapter 14. Mark is supposed to be, according to some textual critics, supposed to be the earliest gospel and the one that Jesus does not display himself as deity. However, there's a verse here that does kind of obliterate that claim. It's in Mark 14:62. He's being questioned before the high priest. Remember, this high priest is of the Jewish faith, of the Jewish Sanhedrin, and understands some of the terminology that Jesus uses, maybe in ways that we don't understand it today. The high priest asks him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus said, "I am, and you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." So again, we see what looks like a forecast to the second coming that does not parallel the coming of Muhammad or the coming of Baha'u'llah or anybody else that may have claimed to be Christ. Sitting at the right hand of power, coming with the clouds of heaven. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but I know it doesn't look like a natural birth, as these other supposed Christs have had. Now, the interesting thing is that Muslims and Baha'is believe that Jesus was born of a virgin, and they might not be sure why that would be the case, other than God doing something. But in this virgin birth, you have the full nature of God and the full nature of man wrapped into one person, Jesus Christ. No one else on the list of manifestations of God in the Bahai faith can claim that same thing. And I think this is an underrated point. This virgin birth shows something about the nature of Jesus that is not in the nature of these other so-called prophets. He's not of this world. He didn't claim to be of this world. John chapter 3 is a great place to go, where Jesus talks about that. He tells Nicodemus, "If I told you earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended into heaven but he who descends from heaven, the Son of Man." And you remember in that prior Mark verse, he also refers to himself as the Son of Man. I believe it's Jesus' most popular distinction regarding the nature of who he is the Son of Man. In John 10, Jesus again warns about the supposed claim that other people are there to be the shepherds of the people of this earth. It's the parable of the Good Shepherd. Jesus compares himself both to the shepherd and the gate for the sheep. He says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." How do these other prophets show their love? If they came as manifestations of God, and God is primarily love, I believe that's the claim of the Baha'is, not the claim of Muslims, that's for sure. Muslims leave out the attribute of love from God's core attributes. But if God is loving toward mankind, what does he do to prove that? The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. John 15:13, Jesus says, "Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends." He calls them his friends. Yes, Baha'u'llah died what appears to be a martyr's death, but what's the evidence that he's laying down his life for his friends? Jesus came and said that was his purpose, to lay down his life for his friends. Look at Matthew 20:28. What does Jesus say is the purpose of his coming? Was it to teach people about God, like so many other religions claim? Was it to be a good example, teach moralistic values so that we can be better people? Did he come to educate, just to prophesy? Here's what he said about himself. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. You have these ideas wrapping together. The love of God is seen in the only begotten Son of God. And Jesus, from the beginning of his ministry, believed that what he was going to do was lay down his life for his friends, and I would say for his enemies. He gave his life as a ransom for many. What's a ransom? That's a payment, the cost to purchase a slave. So we're slaves. We're in complete bondage, and the Son of Man came as one of infinite worth to purchase us back to himself. This is far different from what Islam would claim about Jesus' purpose. They don't believe he died on the cross. They believe he came and just taught people about God and was a good example and was sinless and was born of a virgin, but they don't believe the core elements of the gospel, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and that does anything to absolve the sins. Similar with the Baha'is. I'm not sure what their outlook is on salvation. It very well may be universalistic because it seeks to find the truth of all different perspectives. In fact, here's a couple of the key doctrinal claims of the Bahai faith. There is one religion, there is one God, and one human race. Of course, we as Christians would say, absolutely, there is one God. There can't be two greatest conceivable beings. If there were two, they could only have half dominion over this place. But there is one. And the Bahai faith believes that. But where they go wrong is that there may be contradictory claims about God from different religions. As I just said, Islam does not say that God is love. Of the many attributes they list about God, love is not one of them. They believe that God is non-Trinitarian. Either God is a Trinity or he's not a Trinity. Both can't be true. The Bahai faith says both can be true. It says that there's also one human race, and I'm not sure that's an important point even to make. I think the Bible celebrates diversity. As you look at the book of Revelation, you see every tribe, tongue, people, and nation before the throne of God worshiping. I think it just enhances the atmosphere of worship and enhances the beauty of God that he would call to himself a variety of people. But yes, in a sense, there's one humanity with one need at its core. So what's a quick way to maybe summarize the rebuttal of the Bahai claims? Listen carefully to this. If the Bahai faith says Christianity is true, and Christianity says the Bahai faith is false, then the Bahai faith is false. If the Bahai faith says Christianity is true and Christianity is not true, then the Bahai faith is false. If the Bahai faith says that Christianity was true and it is no longer true, then it was never really true and the Bahai faith is false. If the Bahai faith says Christianity was true and it's no longer true, then the Bahai faith may be true today and false tomorrow. Here's what the Baha'is hope. They want to say Christianity is true, and that Christianity says the Bahai faith is true. So if Christianity is true, the Bahai faith is true. But the Bahai faith depends on the idea that Christianity was true, but that it's given way to further truths. If Christianity was true, then it's still true. And if it is true, then any genuine future revelation must support the enduring Christian truths. So what some of these world religions fail to recognize about the Christian faith is the nature of Jesus, the nature of the Trinity, the nature of salvation, and these core things. So much of the world wants to believe that the Christian faith is just about acting nice and being loving toward one's neighbor, and that that's all that Jesus really came to do. But as I said earlier, he saw himself as coming to give his life a ransom for many, that no one has come from heaven except the Son of Man, and the Son of Man came to lay down his life for his sheep, for his friends, so that they could go in and be safe and find pasture and find forgiveness for their sins. This is the core of what Jesus came for. Here's some others that contradict some of these Bahai claims. The Helper, that's the Holy Spirit, will be with people forever. Remember, Jesus promised that the coming one is going to be with them forever. Baha'u'llah lived and then died. no resurrection. Muhammad lived and then died, no resurrection. God is to be glorified through Jesus forever. Romans 16:27, Ephesians 3:21. God is glorified through Jesus forever. Not Jesus for a time, and then a new prophet for a time, and then a new prophet for a time. Jesus said he was filling that right hand of the throne of God, which is proverbial for being equal in power, being this person of the Trinity. Hebrews 1:8, the throne of God the Son, is forever. Jesus is the everlasting priest. He doesn't intercede for a time and give way to somebody else who manipulates the teachings of Jesus and pretends like he's just one little manifestation, but better manifestations are coming in the future. He's the everlasting priest. He's the final priest offered once for all. This is according to Psalm 110:4, Hebrews 5:6, and Hebrews 7:17, and Hebrews 7:24-25. And Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and into the exhaustive future, according to Hebrews 13:8. He doesn't change forms. I understand the progressive, as in the fullness of the truth is revealed in story form. But when these truths begin to contradict previous truths and not continue the ultimate story of God's redemption of mankind, I have to say, this is something different. It is not one religion. It's not like the word is going to last for a time and then give way to something else. Isaiah 40, verse 8, and 1 Peter 1:25. And even Jesus didn't come to overthrow the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. And if they're fulfilled, what need do we have to look forward to somebody else to come and make complete what Jesus already said was complete? All right, plenty more could be said about Bahai and Islamic beliefs, even in terms of how Jesus relates to both faiths. I hope this helps invigorate a little bit of hunger to figure out what Jesus came for, what Jesus said of himself, and how he said he would return, and the nature of the Bahai and Islamic beliefs that contradict what Jesus said, both about himself and how he would return. The sayings of Jesus are sufficient to establish Christian faith and to exclude the false claims coming from some of these religions who just want to say that Jesus is a nice prophet of God who came to teach us good principles and leave a good example, when he came to do so much more. He came to provide redemption, forgiveness for the sins of mankind so that we can live in a right relationship with God forever.